وفي حال الجوع تراها مجنونة. وفي حال الشبع تراها مختالة. So it says, talking about those four things, the dunya, the khalq, shaitan and nafs. We talked about the three things, and now he's on the fourth one, which is the nafs. Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah says, with regard to the nafs, enough it is for you to see what you witness of its different states, and what type of low desires come from it, and what the degrading things it wants you to do. Yeah? Enough for you to notice or to witness the sort of things that the nafs wants you to do, to know what it's all about. So it says, when the nafs is in a state of shahwa, all these desires are aroused in the nafs, it's like an animal. And when it's in a state of anger, it's like a wild beast. You know? If people get their anger problems, you know, some people have anger problems. So that's a horrible. When you see someone in that state, they can't control their anger, and the sort of things they might do, and how they even look. You know, they look like a shaitan, and they act like a shaitan. So that's just someone who just can't control their anger. So this is also from the nafs, this severe anger. A lot of people, they do things they will regret. You know, if people who can't control their anger. You know, a man would beat his wife or his children or things like that, and then regret it afterwards. You know, because they can't. The anger takes over them and they can't control it. وَالْكَاذِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ, it says in the Quran, وَالْكَاذِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ. When describing the true believers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, those who suppress their anger. Al-Kadhimin al-Ghayz. When the anger is coming up, they suppress their anger and don't let it overtake them. So their anger is only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَفِي حَالِ الْمُصِيبَةِ تَرَاهَا طِفْلًا صَغِيرًا. When the nafs is afflicted by hardships, you see it's like a small child. In other words, it's like a child that starts crying. Oh, why is this happening to me? And this is not fair. And that's just like a child, a response to something. Yeah. The wise person or the mature person is going to say, you know, recognize this is an affliction is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to test me. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised in the Quran, He will test all of us. So this is a manifestation of what the Quran says that will happen to us in this dunya. So therefore I have to try my best to have sabr. You know, that's what the mature person will say. The child will say, why is this happening? Start getting angry or despairing or crying, etc. وَفِي حَالِ نِعْمَةِ تَرَاهَا فِرْعَوْنًا. And the nafs, when the person is in a state of blessing, the nafs become like a Fir'aun. Yeah? So once again, the person now, he's not in tribulation, but he's in the opposite. He's having a lot of blessings, wealth, success. But instead of being like a mature person who says, I must thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of this is from Allah and I could lose it anytime if Allah chooses, so I should be grateful to Him and increase my ibadah. This person who's just in control by his nafs becomes like a Fir'aun and arrogant and proud and thinks he has power and all of these things, and nothing can get rid of the things that he's been given. And he says this is something that I've earned myself. Yeah, that says in the Quran. وَفِي حَالِ الْجُوعِ تَرَاهَا مَجْنُونًا. When hunger afflicts the person, the nafs becomes like a majnoon. He becomes unable to have sabr, in other words. وفي حال الشبع تراها مختالا. When it is in a state of plenty, the nafs become mukhtal, proud and arrogant once again. إن أشبعتها بطرت ومرحت وإن جوعتها صاحت وجزعت فهي كما قال الأول. So if you feed the nafs, then it becomes proud, arrogant, exalting itself. Batirat is like exceeding the bounds, and وَإِن جَوَّعْتَهَا, but if you make it hungry, cause it to be hungry, it becomes troubled and screaming in pain and so on. So as they said in line of poetry, كَحِمَارِ سُوءٍ إِنْ أَشْبَعْتَهُ رَمْحَ النَّاسَ وَإِنْ جَاعَ نَهِقًا. Anyone got the translation there?
This self is like an ill-tempered ass that when it's hungry it's satisfied, it tramples upon the people, and when it is hungry it brays. When it's hungry it's satisfied, it tramples upon the people, and when it's hungry it brays.
Yeah. So both ways it's bad, When it's full, then it's neglecting other people's rights and being arrogant, and when it's hungry, it's braying like a donkey, crying, in other words, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. ولقد صدق بعض الصالحين حيث قال إن رداءة هذه النفس وجهلها بحيث إذا همت بمعصية أو انبعثت لشهوة لو تشفعت إليها بالله سبحانه ثم برسوله وبجميع أنبيائه وبكتابه وبجميع سلف الصالح من عباده وتعرض عليها الموت والقبر والقيامة والجنة والنار لا تعطي الانقياد ولا تترك الشهوة. So this nafs is so of such a nature, of such a obstinate nature, that even if you exhort it in the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the name of the Prophet, in the name of all of the Prophets, in the name of the book, meaning the Quran, in the name of all of the Salaf as-Salih, and you remind it about death and the grave and the Yawm al-Qiyamah and the hellfire and paradise, even still, it's so obstinate, it will continue in its ways. This is just talking about the nafs. It will still refuse to obey, and it will still want to fulfill its desires, despite knowing all of those things, in other words. So that's the nafs. ثم استقبلتها بمنع رغيف تسكن وتترك شهوتها. Whereas on the other hand, if you just deny it a slice of bread, that will be enough to quieten it down and to leave its desires. لتعلم خستها وجهلها. This should give an indication of just how demeaned and ignorant is the nafs. وإياك أيها الرجل أن تغفل عنها فإنها كما قال خالقها العالم بها جل جلاله إن النفس لعمارة بالسوء. So Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah says, beware, O person, that you become heedless of the dangers of this nafs. Because it is as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who created this nafs, has said in the Quran, إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ, that the nafs surely is always commanding to evil. Yeah, so if you look at the ammara, ammara is an intensive form, what's named in Arabic as ism al-mubalagha. Which means it's an intensive form of the fa'il, the one who does something. So not just amir, but ammar. Like you have alim and you have allama. Allama is intensive form for someone who has a huge amount of knowledge. So Ammara is the same form you can see in Arabic. It means it's always commanding to do bad. It's always telling you to do bad. فكفى بهذا تنبيها لمن عقل. So this is, Imam says, this should be enough for someone who uses his intelligence. ولقد بلغنا عن رجل من بعض الصالحين يقال له أحمد بن أرقم البلخي أنه قال نازعتني نفسي بالخروج إلى الغزو فقلت سبحان الله إن الله تعالى يقول إن النفس لأمارة بالسوء وهذه تأمرون بالخير لا يكون هذا أبدا. This is an interesting story, just showing the subtle ways that the nafs can trick us as well. It was one of the righteous people of the past, he says, whose name was Ahmad ibn Arqam al-Balkhi. He said, one time my nafs was trying to persuade me to go out on jihad, fighting in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I said to myself, subhanallah, how can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, Inna nafsa la'ammaratun bisu, and this nafs is trying to tell me to do something good. It just shows how these people also were so introspective, you know. They used to observe their own nafs so carefully all the time, and always think, you know, so carefully about their intentions. This is what the story is showing us, how we should be so careful about just thinking through everything before you do something. Your intention. So, is there any riyah there? Is there any showing off? You know, what's happening? Why am I really doing this? This was the state of these people. Yeah, that's how they get to the stage of ikhlas, of such extreme sincerity, that every step they take is just sincerely and purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No mixture of any type of intentions comes in. So this is the context and how to understand the story. He says, how can this be? You know, in other words, what does it mean my nafs is telling me? It was a desire coming within him to go for jihad. It was a desire. Normally, if you do an ibadah, you're going against your desires. Yeah? Like, you know, you have to pray Qiyamul Layl, you want to just sleep. So you force yourself, you fight in your desire and you pray. He was finding his desire is to actually go. Yeah? And so he was suspicious. Yeah? Why he was suspicious? Because you can't be sure, sometimes your desires will correspond with ibadah as well. Yeah? But often, the rule is that the thing that is the worshipping Allah is often going to be difficult on your nafs and against your inclinations and desires, your shahawat. But sometimes not always the case. Not always the case. For example, if you're fasting and then some brothers call you for food, or your parents have made a special food for you and you're having a nafal fast, here the ibadah is to break the fast and to eat the food, which will be in line with your desires.
Camera shaking, I think.
Oh, sorry.
Then you have to make the fast up as a obligatory fasting.
Yeah, with the Hanafis, yeah. If you started something as a nafal, you would have to then make it up later as a wajib. Okay, so he said, you know, why is my nafs, this can't be right. ولكنها استوحشت فتريد لقاء الناس لتستريح إليهم وتسامع الناس بها ويستقبلونها بالتعظيم والبر والإكرام. So then he realized, he said, what it is, actually the nafs, it's not the jihad it wants to go on, but it's what comes with going out. Because he had been isolating himself from people and just doing ibadah, and he realized that really his nafs wanted to be out there, socializing with the people, and also having people talk, well, look at this man, he's been doing ibadah in a cave or whatever, for all these years, and now he's come out, he's going on jihad, he's a pious man, and so on. So, and people will respect him and kiss his hand or whatever, all that stuff. That's what the nafs really wanted, not the jihad itself. فقلت لها لا أنزلك العمران ولا أنزل علة معرفة فأجابت فأسأت الظن بها فقلت الله تعالى أصدق. The translation for that particular next sentence there. فقلت لا أنزلك العمران ولا أنزل علة معرفة فأجابت.
Is that when he's replying to his nafs?
Yeah.
He says, I'm ready to take part in jihad against the enemy, but you are my foremost enemy. I shall therefore launch a jihad first against you. This did not have any effect on itself, so I told him many other things about it. And then he continues.
Which is that Mukhtar Holland?
This is the Dar es Salaam.
Anyone got Mukhtar Holland?
What page of which?
Is that Mukhtar Holland?
Yeah.
That new one? No?
Yeah, new one.
Let's have a look. I'll see if I can find it.
That's a summarised version, isn't it, Mike?
It's a bridged version.
This is the summarised one, yeah.
Is it? I don't know.
There's a new one which is the... there's a new one, isn't it? Which
Yeah,
is...
I think that's the one the Devil's got.
It's not the new one.
It's not the one.
Let's have a look at your one. I can't quite... I don't think the Arabic is quite correct.
Top left.
It's a bit mixed up, that one, so it's not really in order, but you might find it in there. This sort of
Top
really
left. That bit there, the massive chunk of paragraph.
That's
All
right.
the way down
That's the story.
Oh, yeah. And this also felt surprised that agreed to oppose against our nature, thinking no doubt the verse of the Holy Quran. I replied to him saying, I'm ready to take part in jihad, and he said, no, but you're not for me. I'm not sure about that translation, but فقلت والله تعالى أصدق فقلت لها أقاتل الجوع حاسنا ولا تكونين أول قتيل. So he said, I think Allah Alam, but I think he said to the nafs, I will go for the jihad, but I will not, do any of these things that you are wishing, mixing amongst people, etc. But the nafs was consented to this. So then he said further to the nafs, to himself in other words, when I go for the jihad, I'm going to launch myself into the enemy by myself, so that I'll be the first one to be killed. So he's testing the nafs. فأجابت, still it was still happy to go along. It still wasn't resisting. وعد أشياء مما أرادها فأجابت إلى كل ذلك. قال فقلت يا ربي نبهني لها فإني متهم لها مصدق لك. So he also then said several other things to his nafs that he was going to put himself through, if he went out for the jihad. I'm going to do this. So he's denying it, all of those pleasures that he thought the nafs wanted from the jihad, but still the nafs seemed to be consenting and happy to go along. So he was really surprised now, because he was saying, this can't be right. So then he makes dua. He says, oh Allah, show me the truth of this, because I don't trust my own nafs, but I do believe in what you said in the Quran, in the nafs al-ammaratun bisu. Yeah. فكوشفت بها كأنها تقول وكوشفت بها كأنها تقول يا أحمد أنت تقتلني كل يوم بمنعك إياي من شهوات مرات وبمخالفتك ولا يشعر به أحد فإن قاتلت قتلت مرة واحدة فنجوت منك وتسامع مع الناس فيقال استشهد أحمد ويكون لي شرف وذكر. So then when he made this dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sort of revealed to him the truth of the situation, as if he then understood. He's not saying to him, oh Ahmad, every day you kill me by denying me all of my desires, by doing all of this ibadat and everything, and by going against everything I ever want to do. So that's why I prefer if I just die once. We just get it over and done with. And then at least also I'll have a good in this way you kill me every day but no one even knows about it. At least this way I'll die once, and I'll also, people will say what a brave man, he's been shaheed, and I will at least have some glory and everything. Very interesting how deeply introspective these people were. قال فقعدت ولم أخرج للغزو في ذلك العام. So he said, I decided not to go for the jihad that year. فانظر إلى خداع النفس وغرورها. So he says, look at the treachery of the nafs. This is of course when jihad is not fard ayn. At his time when this person was alive, it was a fard kifaya, and it was an option for him to go as a good act, but not. If something becomes fard ayn, then there's no choice. You don't then ask your nafs, do you want to go, do you not want to go? You wouldn't go into that. It's like your 5 daily prayers. Even if you suspect or you're worried that there's some showing off involved, you're still going to do them because they're fard. You have no choice. This was an optional act, to go for the jihad for him at that time. وَتُرَائِيَ النَّاسِ بَعْدَ الْمَوْتِ بِعَمَلٍ لَمْ يَكُونْ بَعْدٍ. So Imam al-Ghazali says, look at this, another point from the story, how treacherous and how deeply tricky it can be, your nafs. And how it wants to show off even after it's dead. It's still thinking, people will talk about me. What a brave man he was killed in jihad, etc. So that is really the sort of level that we have to look within ourselves before we do our actions, to make sure we are really, really sincere. You have to do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, give the charity with your right hand so your left hand doesn't know about it. Because mostly the intentions are mixed up through riya, showing off. وَلَقَدْ صَدَقَ الْقَائِلُ وَأَحْسَنَ تُوقِ نَفْسَكَ وَلَا تَأْمَنْ غَوَائِلَهَا فَالنَّفْسُ أَخْبَثُ مِنْ 70 شَيْطَانًا. Anyone got the translation?
It says, protect yourself from the devastation worked by the self, as it is more heinous than 70 devils.
فتنبه رحمك الله لهذه الخداعة العمارة بالسوء ووطن على مخالفتها قلبك بكل حال تصب وتسلم إن شاء الله تعالى ثم عليك بإلجامها بالتقوى لا حيلة لها سواه. So he says, Imam al-Ghazali says, so may Allah have mercy on you, pay good heed to this very treacherous entity within yourself, which is always commanding to evil or to bad, and prepare your heart, to go against this entity, the nafs, in every situation, in every time. So always beware, be careful, think and think again before doing something if your nafs especially inclines towards it. And then he says you must restrain this nafs through taqwa. There is no other way apart from this. Through taqwa means to guard yourself from transgressing the bounds of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the nafs always wants to transgress the bounds. So taqwa is the thing that keeps you within the boundaries. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives tawfiq. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ هَا هُنَا أَصْلًا أَصِيلًا وَهُوَ أَنَّ الْعِبَادَةَ شَطْرًا شَطْرُ الْاكْتِسَابِ وَشَطْرُ الْاجْتِنَابِ. This Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah says, know now here that we come upon a very foundational principle of this whole matter. And this foundational principle is that ibadah is of two portions. One portion of it is to earn or to do actions, and the other portion is to refrain from doing certain things. So, it's to do certain things and to refrain from those things which are forbidden or which are makruh. فالاكتساب فعل الطاعات والاجتناب والامتناع عن المعاصي والسيئات وهو التقوى. So the first one, to earn, means to do good actions such as prayer, fasting, giving charity, etc. And then the other half, which is to prevent oneself from doing those things which are forbidden, those things which are disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this second one is called taqwa. It's called taqwa. وأن شطر الاجتناب على كل حال أسلم وأصلح وأفضل وأشرف للعبد من شطر الاكتساب. And then a very important point he makes is that the one that is restraining oneself is more important than the one which is earning. He said, is it aslam wa aslah wa afdal, is better, safer, wa ashraf, and more virtuous for the slave than the one of earning. And this is very important, and I think we've covered this before as well. The whole point, there's no point in doing lots of good actions, trying to earn, when someone is still very much persisting in doing things which are haram. It becomes pointless. Not pointless, because obviously, things balance each other out. If you do something haram, you can do good actions, and they may wipe them out. So it's not pointless, but it means you won't be progressing. If you haven't made that tawbah of staying within the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's no progress. So this is the more important aspect, is to stay away from there where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden. ولذلك اشتغل المبتدئون من أهل العبادة الذين هم في أول درجة الاجتهاد بشرط الاكتساب. So he says, an interesting point which other sheikhs mention as well, the sheikhs of tasawwuf, that you will often find the people who are beginners in the spiritual path, being more inclined towards the iktisab of doing lots of good actions. كل همتهم أن يصوموا نهارهم ويقوموا ليلهم ونحو ذلك. All of they're very they have a lot of aspiration and a lot of himmah to pray at night, to fast often, etc. So this happens when people first set out on a spiritual path. ويشتغل المنتهون أولو البصائر من أهل العبادة بشرط الاجتناب. However, the people more advanced in their iman, they then focus much more on preserving the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But not just the outer boundaries, but the inner boundaries as well. Meaning, he says, guarding their hearts and their tongues. بشرط الإجناب إنما همتهم أن يحفظوا قلوبهم عن الميل إلى غير الله. They protect their hearts from deviating from other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So their intentions, It says in the Quran, مَا زَاغَ الْبَصَرُ. And commentators say that on the Mi'raj, when the Prophet ﷺ was on the Mi'raj, he was shown so much, He was shown all of creation, the mulk and the malakut was open to him. He was shown Jannah and An-Nar and all of the heavens. But the Quran said, مَا زَاغَ الْبَصَرُ. His eye did not deviate. Meaning, according to the commentators, he didn't deviate from his intention, which was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. None of that was attractive to him at that time. So this is the state of those people who are then, they've established themselves on the level of Iman, and then they are concerned about maintaining their intention and their ikhlas, and not so much preoccupied in doing lots of extra actions as such. وَبُطُونَهُمْ عَنِ الْفُضُولِ, and of taking excessive.
There's some hadiths where Prophet peace be upon him says, I saw a man who was given Jannah for this or that. Was that from what he saw on the Miraj then? Or is that?
Often, a lot of them were. A lot of those narrations are. For example, when he describes certain people who were being tortured, certain people who are in Jannah. A lot of those narrations are from the Mi'raj journey. But there are some that don't necessarily have to be as well. Because he may have been shown things in dreams as well, or other times. But a lot of them are, So they're guarding their hearts, they're guarding their bodies from taking in excess, unnecessary, that they don't need. So in other words, they're being moderate in their indulgence in the dunya. وَأَلْسِنَتَهُمْ عَنِ اللَّغُوِ, they're guarding their tongues from falsehood, emptiness, empty speech, etc. وَأَعْيُنَهُمْ عَنِ النَّظَرِ إِلَى مَا لَا يَعْنِيهِمْ, and they're guarding their eyes from indulging in those things that don't concern them. So, these are things that we've talked a lot about in the last few weeks. But that's just recapping, that's the state of these people. Especially in the type of society, culture we live in, a very visual culture, where our eyes are bombarded from all directions with all sorts of things, all sorts of images that people didn't have in the past. So even much so difficult for us nowadays than it used to be. Imagine you lived in the past in like a village or some town where there was nothing your eyes could see, really, compared to the type of environment that we live in. So even walking anywhere, there's posters, billboards, everything. Everywhere you go, there's things around you. They try to catch your attention. They're purposely there, for advertising. They want to grab your attention. So it's even more important for us to guard our eyes and things. ولهذا المعنى قال العابد الثاني من العباد السبعة ليونس عليه السلام. So he says then, referring to a story that I'm not fully aware of, but he says, there were 7 worshippers who spoke to Yunus alayhi salam, the Prophet Yunus alayhi salam. I haven't read the whole story, but the second one said to him something on this subject. يا يونس من الناس من حبب إليهم الصلوات فلا يؤثرون عليها شيئا وهي عمود العبادة لله والصدق والتفرع والابتهال ومنهم من حبب إليه الصوم فلا يؤثرون عليه شيئا ومنهم من حبب إليه الصدقة فلا يؤثرون عليها شيئا. So the second of these people that was giving Yunus alayhi salam some advice, I guess. He was saying to him, there's some people that are made to love the prayer, so they prefer this above anything else. And this is to do with, the many different paths that lead to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. It says in the Quran, the end of Surah Al-Ankabut, those who struggle and strive for our sake, we guide them to our paths, subul in the plural, that there's not one path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's some people that are more inclined towards different types of ibadah, and this is all good. Some people are more inclined towards prayer, some people are more inclined towards sadaqah. So he says, they prefer the prayer, and this is the pillar of all worship and truthfulness and humbleness. This is what the person is saying to Yunus alayhi salam, the prayer. And then there are some who love the fast, and they prefer this particular type of worship above anything else. And there are some that have love for giving charity, and this is the thing they love more than anything else. Ya Yunus, wa ana mufassirun laka hadhihi al-khisal. So he says, "Oh Yunus, I will explain to you the deeper meaning of these characteristics. اجعل صومك صمت عن كل سوء. Make your fast a silence or a restraining your tongue from any bad action." Or not necessarily even just tongue, just restraining yourself from doing any bad thing. Have they said tongue or did they say
no, just fasting means you should protect yourself from all sorts of vices and disobedience. So pretty much everything.
It doesn't have to be tongue. وَاجْعَلْ صَدَقَتَكْ كَفَّ الْأَذَى. Make your sadaqah prevention of harm. Don't harm, restrain your harm from others. فَإِنَّكَ لَا تَتَصَدَّقُ بِشَيْءٍ أَفْضَلُ مِنْهُ. You will never give a sadaqah better than that. In other words, once we're going to that thing about better than actually doing more actions is to prevent harm, prevent transgression of your own transgression and harming others, doing things which are haram. وَلَا تَصُومُوا بِشَيْءٍ أَزْكَى مِنْهُ. You will never have a fast more pure than that fast. فإذا علمت أن جانب الاجتناب أولى بالرعاية والاجتهاد فيه فإن حصل لك الشطران جميعا الاجتناب والاكتساب فقد استكمل أمرك وحصل مرادك وقد سلمت وغنمت. So Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah says, now that you understand that the part of worship which is restraining oneself from transgressing boundaries is better than the part which is acquiring more and more good actions. Now that you understand that if you get both of these, which is restraining yourself and acquiring, then you have got the perfection of your affair, and you have reached your where you intended to go, and you are safe, and you are ghanimta, you are getting all of the blessings. فَإِنْ لَمْ تَبْلُغْ إِلَّا إِلَى أَحَدِهِمَا فَلْتَكُنْ ذَلِكَ جَانِبَ الْاجْتِنَابِ. If, however, you are only able to do one of those two, make sure you do the one which is restraining yourself from transgressing and going into haram. If you're only able to do one. فَتَسْلَمَا إِنْ لَمْ تَغْنَمْ. You will be safe, but you will not get extra reward and booty. But at least you have saved yourself from falling into sin and haram. وَإِلَّا خَسِرْتَ الشَّطْرَيْنِ جَمِيعًا وَمَا يَنْفَعُكَ قِيَامُ لَيْلٍ وَالتَّعْبُ. If you do not do this, in other words, if you don't restrain yourself from the haram and you just simply go on trying to do extra nafals and other optional acts, like people who spend time doing dhikr, for example, or doing optional acts of worship like praying duha and then playing another prayer, all these extra prayers that people sometimes pray. And then on the other hand, they're backbiting, harming people with their tongue, harming people with their actions or whatever. They're doing nothing, they're earning nothing. So that's what he says. If you don't do this, you will lose both. Because those good things, optional things you are doing, you don't realize, but they're being lost. Showing disrespect to the Prophet ﷺ is one of those things that causes you to lose your actions as well. It's a major disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It says in Surah Al-Hujurat, لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي. Don't raise your voices above the voice of the Prophet ﷺ. أن تحبط أعمالكم. All of your actions may be wasted and you don't even realize. And look at what a small, what we might think is a small disrespect, just raising your voice above his voice. It's not like, insulting him or hitting him, or just don't raise your voice above his voice. All of your actions may be wasted. So these are things, we have to really take on board. Because it's not for us to say what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not for us, it's for Allah to tell us. It's not for us to say, oh, I'm doing all of this extra ibadat, etc. So he says, your night prayer will not benefit you. ثُمَّ تُهْبِتُهُ بِإِرَادَةٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. You do all of that night prayer, going through all of that effort and ta'ab, tired, and making all of that effort, and then on the other hand you're just wasting it by doing these things, transgressing these bounds. Irada wahida. He said just doing one wrong thing, making one wrong intention. You're missing all your good actions. وَمَا يُهْنِيكَ صِيَامُ نَهَارٍ طَوِيلٍ وَتُفْسِدُهُ بِكَلِمَةٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. And you spend all of this time fasting, long days of fasting, long tiring days, but then one word is just destroying all of that. One bad word of backbiting or lying or sinful word, you're just destroying your good actions. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives tawfiq and protect us from all of that. وَلَقَدْ رَوَيْنَا عَنِ ابن عباس رضي الله عنه أنه قيل له ما تقول في رجلين أحدهما كثير الخير وكثير الشر والآخر قليل الخير وقليل الشر. An interesting question was asked to Ibn Abbas رضي عنهما, one of the most knowledgeable of the younger Sahaba, and they said to him, what do you say about two men? One of them, he does a lot of good but also a lot of bad. And another person, he does very little good but very little bad. Very little harm comes from him. Some of the sultans and these type of people at that time, the governors, they used to be of the first category, They used to do kathiru shar, a lot of harm used to come from them, but at the same time they used to do a lot of good as well. Sadaqah, build things, masjids, but on the other hand, on certain things they were very bad, So these are the type, and then you have the type person who does very little good and very little bad. He's like a normal, probably a person, like awam, villager or something. Doesn't do very many good actions, but no one doesn't really harm anyone. قال لا أعدل بالسلامة شيئا. He says nothing is equal to salam. Meaning the one people are safe from him. The second one. He doesn't harm. The one who doesn't harm, there's nothing equivalent to that. So this just, it's the importance of just, not harming others. Every time we transgress Sharia, it will always cause harm. It's one of the principles of Sharia. That's what the Sharia is there for, to prevent harm. Or if you look carefully and deeply at all of the obligations and all of the fard and all of the things which are haram, they're all there for human beings' benefits. And to prevent harm in either your individual self, your family, or society. that's why when any of these things are transgressed, you see harms coming about in the society.
So in that example, the person that does less evil is in a better state.
It's better, yeah.
Because it says right here, it goes, he radiallahu anhu replied, both are equal.
Yeah, that's what it said.
But then it follows up with, I've told that it's more important to refrain from that which is forbidden than to do that what is enjoined upon. So I think it may have meant both are unequal. I don't know. Both are not equal.
I've got قال لا أعدل بالسلامة شيئا. So I don't know what is, I don't know where, maybe, I'm not sure. I don't know what the Arabic word is. What
Same.
لا أعدل.
Maybe the rest of the paragraph doesn't go through because he's explaining further.
No, I don't think. I mean, I think that was the end of that story, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, I think it's quite obvious what the
Yeah.
must be the second one is better, but I don't know why he's translated it like that. Both are equal. I don't know.
Yeah,
Let's
it
see,
starts-
maybe.
Yeah, both are equal. I've told that it's more important to refrain from what is forbidden than to do what is enjoined upon. So you got counteract.
So he's sort of like explaining. I don't know why, but
Yeah.
for some reason it could be the manuscript he was getting it from was a bit dodgy. Sometimes, if you go back to the source text, like the manuscript or wherever he get them from, sometimes you do find some differences. So it could be there was a difference in the original transmission of the text, or who knows, Allah Alam. Yeah, so that's the thing. So anytime we transgress Sharia, there will be harms. Like the breaking of the principle of riba. Riba, usury, something which was haram in all Sharia, not just ours. There are some things which are forbidden in our Sharia which were permissible in the past, or vice, opposite as well. Often there were things that were, especially to Bani Israel, they were given a lot of prohibition extra for various reasons that we don't have in our Sharia. But there are some things that have always been haram in all Sharias from the beginning. Things like zina, stealing, these type of things, and riba is one of them. It's always been haram because it's a very destructive sin. So when you see in society these things being transgressed, then you see harmful effects taking place. The other thing, another thing that I realized, I noticed once was the ayah of the Quran, لا يتخذ المؤمنون الكافرين أولياء من دون المؤمنين. In the Quran it says in this ayah and in some other ayahs as well, let not the believers take disbelievers as protectors and friends in preference to believers or against other believers. من دون المؤمنين, against other believers. So you are allowed to take friends of the disbelievers as long as it's not against other believers, if you see what I mean. Yeah. So you can have a peace treaty with them, or you can even be allied with them against other disbelievers, with some disbelievers against others that are worse perhaps. But it says in the Quran very clearly, don't take disbelievers as friends against other believers. Yeah? This is very clearly and severely prohibited in the Quran. And if you look at historically, wherever Muslim countries were invaded and conquered by non-Muslims, especially during the colonialist period, there was always this instance of some Muslims, siding with them against other Muslims. Invariably, I guarantee you'll find that. If you look in the history books, always you'll find it. Even in when I was reading recently about the Indian uprising against the British, what they call the Indian Mutiny or whatever name is given. where the people of India, the Muslims and even the Hindus as well, were trying to fight against the British, and they were trying to re-establish the Mughal rule in Delhi, which they did take over the city for a while. But then the British, when they came back, the forces that they came back with were mainly composed of Muslims from northwest frontier and from Punjab. And then they crushed that, rebellion. So you see this all the time, and we know about the Ottomans, how the Arabs were persuaded to help, against the Ottoman Turks. So this is, because there's a breach of a fundamental principle in the Quran there taking place.
Can you just when you say disbeliever and other believers, so we can go with other believers, not disbelievers. Is that?
Well, the Quran says, لا يتخذ المؤمنون الكافرين أولياء من دون المؤمنين. This is in which surah? Surah Al-Imran, about second or third page if you want to look at it later on. So let not the believers take the disbelievers as friends. Awliya means like protectors or friends. Min dunil mu'minin, against or in preference to other believers.
So what is other believers?
So another group of believers. You see what I mean? Another group of believers, Muslims, yeah. Another group of Muslims.
Kuwait and Iraq.
Yeah, all of those are examples, yeah.
Shaykh Bhuti was his, khutbah, not last week, week before. It's about this ayah, and he was talking because now some Muslims from Syria, outside Syria, they take in the America or NATO to, be against. So he was talking about this point as well, exactly, and the ayah as well.
It's interesting, yeah. And because see, if Muslims have difference between them, they have to settle it between them. They don't take allies of disbelievers to settle between Muslims. That's the key. And that's one of the wisdoms, as scholars have pointed out, why the Sahaba had a civil war. Why did the Sahaba fall into this type of civil fighting? It was to teach us as well how is the adab of fighting between Muslims. This is one of the great wisdoms if you think about it deeply. It taught us so many things about how two Muslim groups have to resolve their differences if they do get into fight. Because it says in the Quran, if two groups of Muslims fight, same surah, Surah Al-Hujurat, if you find two groups of the believers fighting, try to make peace between them. And if you cannot, then you help the one that is in the right. So the Quran recognizes that two Muslim groups may fight. It's inevitable, human nature. There may be a genuine, some sort of difference of opinion. So if we look at the Sahaba, when they start fighting, they didn't take booty. When they were fighting the Muslim against Muslim, they didn't take the women and children as slaves. Because they recognize we're not now fighting kuffar. We're not fighting disbelievers, we're fighting believers. We're fighting Muslims, they're our brothers. And Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu actually said that, Hum ikhwanuna baghaw alayna. When one man stood up while Sayyidina Ali was giving khutbah and started saying all this stuff when he was one of the Khawarij, started shouting things to him and all that. The people, they wanted to grab him and probably kill him. And Sayyidina Ali stopped them and said, Hum ikhwanuna baghaw alayna. They are our brothers who have rebelled against us. You see the understanding there, that they are still our brothers. And the Sahaba, you probably know famous story about Muawiyah when the Romans gave him this idea, we'll help you to defeat Sayyidina Ali. And he refused. Because that was the understanding of the Sahaba. If we're fighting among Muslims, we resolve our own differences. We don't take ally of the Romans, even if I think I'm in the right. That's wrong. It's breaking a fundamental thing from the Quran. So Sayyidina Muawiyah actually said to them, sent a message back to them, first I and my cousin or my nephew will resolve our differences, then we'll take care of you. Or something like that. Or first we'll take care of you, then we'll resolve our differences. So very clear understanding of the Sahaba on this point. Very clear. all we have to do is read the Quran. It's not very difficult, you know. I mean, it's because we become divorced from the Quran that we don't understand these very straightforward principles of our deen. And not just divorced from the Quran, but our hearts are hardened. So even if we go to the Quran, we can't understand the Quran. You know, we can't read the Quran properly.
It's a major principle. La darruhu, la diraruhu. There's no harm or reciprocal.
ومثال ما قلناه حال المريض وذلك أن معالجة المريض نصفان. So Imam al-Ghazali says, just to illustrate the point further, give an example like a metaphor. He says, think about the sick person. The sick person, the treatment for the sick person is of two parts. Just like ibadah is of those two parts. You know? نصف هو الدواء ونصف هو الاحتماء. Half of it is to give him medicine, and half of it is to prevent him from ingesting certain things. In other words, put him on a certain regime, a certain type of diet for that particular illness. فإن اجتمع فكأنك بالمريض قد برئ وصح وإلا فالاحتماه بأولى. If you give him both of these, so you put him on a certain diet and you give him certain medication, that's the ideal. He's got both and he will get better. But if you can only do one, then you should do the one which is to prevent him from ingesting things which are harmful to him. إذ لا ينفع دواء مع ترك الاحتماء وقد ينفع الاحتماء مع ترك الدواء. Because there's no point giving medicine if he's still eating or drinking the wrong things. This is obviously the traditional wisdom of medical practice, where diet is very important. Because traditionally the physicians, they used to view people as a human being, as an entity that was in balance. It's very clear if you read Islamic medicine, etc., what's called Islamic medicine. The majority of Muslim physicians, actually, their medicine was Greek. They took it from the ancient Greek medicine. And there's another thing which people call prophetic medicine, Tib al-Nabawi, which is not really a system of medicine. It's just some scholars collected together things that were narrated from the Prophet ﷺ. And many of those things are often weak narrations. So I think we have to be very careful when we go to those type of books. The Prophet ﷺ, you know, he didn't impart a system of medicine to people. Partly because they didn't really need, the Sahaba weren't getting ill because they were in such a perfect balance with themselves and their environment. You know the story about the doctor who was sent there, and then after a year he left Medina saying, "There's no work for me here." So that just to clarify for people, prophetic medicine, like there's books published now, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. These are just some scholars have collected together sayings attributed to the Prophet ﷺ. But be very careful, because you have to. Those which are sahih are very few on this particular topic. And then the medicine that the Muslims developed in the height of Muslim civilization was mainly drawn from the Greek medicine, especially from a particular person called Galen, whose works were translated into Arabic, etc. So that system was, but obviously the Muslims added a lot, to it, and they built many beautiful hospitals and things like that, which we really need to rediscover what these hospitals were like. Because I was reading about some of them, I was amazed at the type of things they had. Things that now are coming back into medicine as well. They were very concerned about the environment. The hospitals were often very nice environment. They used to have plants, greenery. They used to have music, what they call now music therapy. They used to have music sometimes. They felt that that would help the healing process as well. They were really sort of, the way the Islamic medicine was at that time. And all of the major cities in the Islamic world had huge hospitals, and often they were built by princes or sultans, and they were free of charge for everyone. Very rich people would go there, and very poor people would go in there to get treatment. So this was if you look at the part of foundation of their philosophy was that the human being is like in a balance, and you can see how the Muslims contribute to that and they developed the Greek system because they brought in the Quranic principles. They made use, because the Quran gives us a lot of principles of how we look at creation, how we look at the human being, how we look at nature. So these can be applied then to that Greek system. So it was very much in line with the Quran that the human being is built in this balance with his environment. Because the Quran says, قَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We created a human being in a perfect form. And the Quran also says, وَخَلَقَ له the translation of it is we created everything in the earth for the human being. Created everything in the earth, جميعا ما في الأرض جميعا, everything that is in the earth for the human being. وَخَلَقَ لَكُمْ مَا فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا. He created for you, meaning all human beings, everything in the earth. So it means like the heavens and the earth are subjugated for the human being. They're in the service of the human being. So there is a type of balance, a type of harmony when the human being is in a natural environment. So this is what those physicians recognize, that illnesses come through taking in things which are putting you out of balance. And the main way that is through the stomach. The main way that we can go out of balance is what we're putting into our bodies. You see what I mean? Nowadays we have added issues of we putting things into our body through our lungs as well, because pollution in the air, or car fumes, for example. Why did they change from leaded to unleaded? Because they found out that lead was causing major problems for people, brain damage in kids, etc. So in the past they didn't really have that type of thing, air pollution. So it was mainly what you eat that would put the body out of balance and cause illness. So that's how physicians worked, and then the job of the physician was to put the body back into balance to treat that illness. And so that's why, the diet was so important. احتماء. وَلَقَدْ قَالَ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ أَصْلُ كُلِّ دَوَاءٍ الْحِمْيَةِ. So there's this hadith which was quite fascinating. The Prophet ﷺ, once again I don't know the strength of the hadith, the foundation of every cure is the diet, وَالْمَعْنَى بِهَا وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمْ أَنَّهَا تُغْنِي عَنْ كُلِّ دَوَاءٍ. So he says the meaning of this, and Allah knows best, is that a good diet means we don't need other types of medicines. We won't need other type of medicine. وَلِذَا يُقَالُ إِنَّ أَهْلَ الْهِنْدِ جَلُّ مُعَالَجَتِهِمْ الْحِمْيَةِ. So it is said that the people of India, most of their cures are through dietary means. Obviously the civilization of India was considered a great civilization at that time, and the Arabs very much respected that civilization, similar with the Chinese as well. بِمَنْعِ الْمَرِيضِ عَنِ الْأَكْلِ وَالشَّرْبِ وَالْكَلَامِ عِدَّةَ أَيَّامٍ. Interestingly, he puts within diet, he says they will prevent the person from eating, drinking and speech as well. So they included speech as a form of restriction on the diet. فَيَبْرَ وَيَصَحْ بِذَلِكَ الْأَخِيرِ. And this is often enough for the sick person to become better just by being stopped from eating and drinking, either completely or certain type of things you shouldn't eat, فتبين لك بهذه الجملة أن التقوى ملاك الأمر وجوهره وأهلها هم الطبقة العليا من العباد فعليك ببذل المجهول في ذلك وصرف كل العناية إليه والله سبحانه ولي التوفيق. So he says, now it has become clear to you from all of this that taqwa is the central controlling factor and the essence of this whole matter. Taqwa meaning not transgressing into haram. And the people of taqwa, they are the highest level of the worshippers. So then now it is incumbent upon you to exert your full effort and to put your full inayah, put your full focus upon this issue. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who gives tawfiq. We have 3 doctors here today. Anyone want to say anything about all that traditional medicine?
I mean, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is the food and drink aspect, is that consistent with our common understanding now?
Yeah, I definitely like most of the research now for health is focusing towards food and the issue of obesity and its relationship with numerous different illnesses. And there's one research that came recently in the BMJ of the importance of whole grain fibre cereals and rolling, so reducing cancer. And so scientifically that's where it's going, but the only drawback is that it's tainted by the sort of industrial corporate angle in it, which finds most research. So things like, for example, obesity. You could say that obesity, this is a natural way to do it through diet, but the obesity drug industry is massive, and like Orlistat, which is a drug which is supposed to help you lose weight. The way it works is by not making you eat less, but you eat what you want to eat, but it stops your body absorbing the fat. So it's like a totally perverse way of dealing with a problem that doesn't work anyway, but obviously it's expensive medication. So I think the whole of Western health is very strongly influenced by the sort of corporate process of making money and diet industry. So if you took that all out of the equation, you'd probably have a more Islamic model of health. But the science cannot be suppressed, which is that it all points to having like this is all scientifically true, like good diet, reduction of quantities, healthy things is probably definitely true. But another interesting thing is what you were saying about the restraining yourself, like the common presentation of indigestion, acidity. Its main factors are overeating and acidic, spicy foods, fizzy drinks, and those acidic products. And if you're going to give treatment for this, obviously, if you had to choose what's better, take these omeprazole tablets and then don't emphasize much on changing the diet. It's not going to work. But if you just said there's no medicine, but just stop eating this, this, and this, your body would naturally recover from that process. So removing the harmful substance is far superior to doing it, to giving the treatment. But obviously, removing it and giving treatment would make you better quicker. But giving treatment and continuing with the food, you would never get better ultimately because you're still. So it's definitely.
Like you say, the issue is everything's sponsored by Mars.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. People, if you're able to get yourself out of that way of thinking for your own personal health, you probably. I think Islamically, you can't really argue with the simple sunnah advice of eating in moderation and avoiding haram things, and obviously alcohol and things in excess
alcohol completely, I'd say.
Yeah. Unless you're starving to death.
Jazakallah khair. I'm glad you mentioned actually about the role of drug companies and corporate business in medicine.
That's what it comes down to. I mean, the whole of Western health is, even look at go to your GP, they're driven by so many financial targets. How are you going to get proper medical advice from your doctor? Because he wants to give you certain drugs and he wants to not give you certain drugs. So your own doctor is influenced by, material concerns. Like, you're not getting the best drugs for certain things from your GP because they're too expensive. And they're too expensive because companies need to make profits and, all these different things are...
It's an interesting book I'm reading at the moment. It's called Boys Adrift. It's about teenage boys and their stimulus in today's culture, etc. It's written recently. It talks about the US drug industry and what's prescribed there. So young boys, when they get slightly agitated, excitable, etc., and they get disciplined at school and parents have to come in, etc. They go straight to the doctor and they get Ritalin. They prescribe Ritalin, and that's rife in the States.
It's very big in America.
You're a really interesting point.
Not only that, I think some time ago there was an article in BMJ that these people did some research regarding fasting, on the book, because they used to think, it will imbalance the thing. But later on they came to the conclusion it is good for health,
Fasting, yeah, it's true.
And the other thing, as the Imam said, about anger and temper, which is very important part of the diet. Because in these days, anger, your blood pressure goes up, your pulse goes up, all these things. So it is not good. That is very true.
Goes up.
That will be not good for the healthy man, as well as if somebody is suffering from something.
And also the thing of despair, isn't it? Because a lot of depression and mental health illnesses, despair, not having a framework to look at your life and what's happening to you from a Aqidah point of view. People fall into despair if you realise it's a test and you have to respond to that test, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is supposed to be doing that for you. Whereas if you don't have any of that framework, people will say, why did this happen to me? What I can't do anything about it. This thing is also a big factor.
The Prophet says, "Wala ta'juz," don't despair.
And that example about the kids in America as well, just another point of Western medicine is like there's a real type of over-medicalization of everything, So people want to go to doctors for everything, which not necessarily used to be in the orbit of medicine. But there's a driving force behind that, which is once again making money out of it. Pregnancy is one thing that's often talked about, how that's become very medicalized. Which used to be a very natural thing. People used to give birth all the time, at home, etc. But how that's become a very medicalized whole process is seen as very medicalized, and so there's a lot of money being made throughout the whole process. Everyone who gets pregnant is going to go through a whole medical system. So further areas of our life become medicalized as well. And often, once again, the driving factor of some people are making lots of money from those things. Should we start on the next section anyway, inshallah, for 5-10 minutes? So next, فصل في رعاية الأعضاء الأربعة العين واللسان والبطن والقلب. So the next section is related to the previous one, on guarding the 4 members, the eye, the tongue, the stomach and the heart. So related to what's already been said quite extensively, but once again sort of summarizing it and just recapping. ثم راعي هذه الأعضاء الأربعة التي هي الأصول. So he says, after this, after the previous, making sure that you're in a position of taqwa, you're not transgressing into haram, then take care of these 4 members of your body, which are the core members: the eye, the tongue, the stomach and the heart. So you see how he's now reducing to the core aspects. So before he talked about 7 limbs, didn't he? Which included the ear as well. What else was that? Perhaps the private parts. Yeah, but now he's reducing it to the 4 core things, because he's trying to give us just what is the most core, essential things we need. الأول العين وحسبك فيها أن مدار أمر الدين والدنيا على القلب وأن خطر القلب وشغله وفساده في الأكثر من العين. This is, and he's being very, very concise now, just summarizing everything that went before. He says, no, it's enough to know that the eye is the central point of all of the affair of your deen and dunya. No, sorry, the heart. The heart is the central point through which all of your deen and dunya revolves. And the thing which has the greatest effect on the heart is the eye. The thing which has the greatest effect on the heart is the eye. So once again, think about the visual culture that we're in. All of those images that are shown to us in all directions, internet, television, even if you're just walking in the roads, all the posters and everything. ولذلك قال علي رضي الله عنه من لم يملك عينه فليس للقلب عنده قيمة. So Sayyidina Ali رضي الله عنه said, the one who doesn't take care of his own eye, then he doesn't give a true value to his heart. So about protecting the heart means protecting our iman. It means to guard our eyes. والثاني اللسان وحسبك أن فيه ربحك وغنيمتك وثمرة تعبك واجتهادك كله للعبادة والطاعة وأن خطر العبادة واحتياتها وإفسادها في الأكثر من قبل اللسان. So the second one, the tongue. He says, enough for you to know that all of your profit, all of your everything you earn, and the fruit of all of your works, is linked to the tongue. Meaning, the tongue saying the wrong things, saying things which are haram, can lead to the disappearance of all of these actions. بالتصنع والتزين والغيبة ونحوها. So the tongue, تصنع تزين, like it can fall into misleading people, lying, exaggerating, for purpose of showing off, for example. And then, blatantly into things like backbiting. يتلف عليك باللفظة في لحظة واحدة ما تعبت فيه سنة بل 5 و10. He says, in one moment, in one thing that you say with your tongue can cause a whole year of worship, of hard work that you've done to be wasted. He says, nay, even 5 or 10 years. This is because the mercy and the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not always linked to the amount of worship or the amount of sin that we do. It's very clear from certain hadith where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned certain people, like the prostitute, the woman who had committed her whole life doing sins, but at one point she saw, she drank water from the well, and then she saw a dog that was thirsty, and she felt pity, mercy. She put down the bucket, took water, gave it to the dog, and because of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave all of her previous sins. So this is why the scholars, they really stress the importance of just watching everything carefully. It could be one good thing you do that could save you, and it could be one bad thing you do that could destroy you. So that's what he means there. It could be just one word you just said at the wrong time, wrong place. You harmed someone, or you did something very bad with your tongue, that could wipe away all of the good actions you've done for a whole year or many years. وَلِذَلِكَ قِيلَ مَا شَيْءٌ أَحَقُّ بِطُولِ السِّجْنِ مِنَ الْلِسَانِ. So they said, this is why it is said, there is nothing that is more deserving to be imprisoned for a long time than the tongue. وفيما روي أن أحد العباد السبعة قال ليونس عليه السلام. And then going back to that same story about the 7 people that were giving advice to Yunus alayhi salam, another one of them, he said, يا يونس إن العباد إذا اجتهدوا فالعبادة لم يتقوا على عبادتهم بشيء أفضل من الصبر عن الكلام في فصل طويل ثم عاد إلى ذلك فقال ولا يكونن عندك شيء آثر من حفظ لسانك ولا تكونن لشيء عأن به من سلامة صدرك فهذه. So it says one of them was saying to Yunus alayhi salam, when the worshippers, they exert a lot of efforts in worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is nothing better that they do in protecting their worship than restraining their tongue. So restraining the tongue protects one's worship. You remember the hadith about the woman who the Sahaba, they said she's prays every day and she fasts every night, but her neighbors are not safe from her tongue. And the Prophet said, "Hiya finnar," she is in the fire. So that's what they mean. If you want to protect your good worship, then restrain the tongue. We don't want to waste our time doing all of these ibadat, prayer and fasting, and then at the same time it's all being wasted by harming other people with the tongue. And then he said this was a long narration about this, what this person was saying, but then later on he said there is nothing more effective than guarding one's tongue and in protecting one's heart. ثم اذكر النفس التي تكلمت فيها بفضول ما كان يضرك لو قلت أستغفر الله فربما يوافق ساعة عزيزة فيغفر الله لك فتربح راشدا. وقلت لا إله إلا الله فيكون لك من الأجر والذخر ما لا يحيط به وهمك أو تقول أسأل الله العافية فربما يتفق حسن نظر فيستجيب الله تعالى دعوتك فنجوت من بلية الدنيا والآخرة. ألا يكون من الخسران العظيم والغبن الفظيع أن تفوت نفسك كل هذه الفوائد الكريمة وتجعل نفسك ووقتك في فضول أقل ما يلزمك فيه اللوم والحساب يوم القيامة ولقد أحسن القائل. So he says, Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, how does he translate the beginning of that? What's called النفس التي تكلمت فيها بفضول?
He says, I beg Allah for well-being and for that he may not be received.
The beginning of that?
The first bit?
Paragraph, yeah.
He then went on to say, you certainly have nothing more effective than the preservation of your tongue and you have no better means of caring for the silence of your breast. You must also remember that all those breaths in which you spoke to much that was harmful to you, it would be better for you if you said, I seek Allah's forgiveness, for you may plea, may
Okay,
your
yeah,
plea
yeah,
may
yeah.
coincide with precious moment.
Yes, nafas, yeah, that's true. Yes, that makes sense.
I have here anfas as well.
Oh, you got
Yeah,
anfas,
yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Nuzkur al-anfas.
Yeah, makes sense. So remember all those times when you have spent your tongue speaking fadul, speaking unnecessary, or speaking bad, or speaking just wasting your breaths and your tongue. Would it have harmed you if you had said astaghfirullah instead, or you use that time to do astaghfirullah or dhikr? Maybe that was the time when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have forgiven you. That was a time when Allah would have been looking at you with that mercy and the rahmah. It's one of those things that we sometimes we don't know when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will feel merciful towards us. This is also in certain hadith in a more concrete way, where it says, for example, every night there's a time when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to the lowest heaven and says, is anyone asking forgiveness? Every Jum'ah there is a time, before Maghrib, where if you made a dua it would be accepted, but we don't know that time. But this applies at any time as well. We don't know what's the time that will be accepted. We don't know when we might say something that might have that sincerity that might be accepted. We don't know when we might make that dua that Allah will accept or grant us immediately. So that's what he's saying. How do you know that time? Instead of saying all that, you could have said astaghfirullah. Maybe that would have been the time that Allah would have forgiven you everything. Or you could have said La ilaha illallah, and it could have, maybe that could have earned you so much reward that you can't even imagine. That one La ilaha illallah. Because sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might take one action and just multiply it by thousands of times. We don't know. As the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, any good action is multiplied at least by 10. Up to 700, up to much more than that, he said. At least it will be 10 times any good action you do, but it could be up to 700, up to even much more. So much more that we can't even imagine, just for one good action. That all depends on the generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that moment. So that's what he's trying to get to. Yes, we're guaranteed 10 times of any good action. We're guaranteed 10 times. But that also obviously depends on our sincerity within the action. But there's time when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like the story of that woman who gave the drink to the dog, that one action was just multiplied by millions, so everything she had done was forgiven. There's nothing to stop that, because this is from the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that if you do a bad action, you only get the recompense for the bad action. You only get one. One sin is one. You don't get multiplication of sin. But for good actions, because it's from generosity, it can be endless. Or maybe you, instead of wasting your time doing all that wasting speech, you could have said, "Oh Allah, I ask Allah for afiyah." And that would have been the time when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have accepted your dua and given you afiyah in this life and the next. So he says, is it not from the greatest loss and from the greatest treachery to yourself that you have denied yourself all of these great benefits? Instead of spending your time doing something good, you spend all of that time wastefully. In the very least, what you were doing during that time is something that will lead to a long wal-hisab. Even if you weren't doing something sinful, you were merely wasting that time away. At the very least, that's going to lead to loam. You're going to lead to blaming yourself on the Day of Judgment. Why did I waste that time? Why didn't I do something more that could have got me to either away from this punishment or into higher ranks in Jannah? Yeah? And hisab, it will lead to a reckoning, because everything that we do that is wasteful, that is not necessary, it will lead to a reckoning on the Day of Judgment. Why did you spend your money in this way? Why did you spend your time in this way? Should we finish with these 3 lines of poetry? A nice way to finish, probably.
I've only got 2 lines.
Got one
I
line
actually
here.
emailed Al-Baz about the missing section. They said it wasn't in the manuscript.
In the manuscript, no.
It wasn't. The
No.
edition
In the manuscript they heard.
Shall I read my 2 lines
Yeah.
then? The sonnet. Whenever you intend to utter idle talk, replace it with the glorification of the Lord.
Have you got another one?
Essentially the same thing. Yeah. If you want to use your tongue with some false talk, do not do so, but instead use it for rehearsing the sacred names of Allah.
Yeah, I'll read it because it's an easy poem anyway to translate. أغتنم ركعتين في ظلمة الليل إذا كنت فارغا مستريحا وإذا ما هممت بالنطق في الباطل فاجعل مكانه تسبيحا فاغتنم فاغتنام السكوت أفضل من خوض وإن كنت بالحديث فصيحا. He says, take booty or take provision from 2 rak'ats in the darkness of the night, if you have the time and the ability to do so. Take that time to pray 2 rak'ats in the middle of the night. And when you decide that you're going to speak something which is false, replace that with something which is tasbih, glorification of Allah. Taking, or let's say, I don't know, taking اغتنام السكوت, how do you translate that, Umar?
اغتنام. Seizing or grabbing.
Seizing, yeah, seizing silence is better than delving into all of these discussions and talks and things. So taking silence is better than delving. Khawd is mentioned in the Quran. Khawd, they are going into all of these falsehoods and talks, and even if you are a very eloquent person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives tawfiq to understand, learn, act, be sincere. Jazallahu anna Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ahli. Jazallahu anna Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ahli. Jazallahu anna Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ahli. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursalin. Alhamdulillah.